Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining. I don't know about anybody else, but I'm kind of ready for 2020 to end and 2021 to start. This has been just an insane spring, and we're going to talk about some of the fallout of that insanity on the wine business, and particularly on the relationship between wine business debtors and creditors, as lenders and borrowers. A little bit of background. I had my first exposure to the wine business my first serious exposure in the mid 80s when I started doing workouts dealing with the fallout from the downturn of the early 1980s. And since then, I've probably seen 4 or 5 different downturns. I've lost count. And one of the themes you'll hear in this presentation is that, in some ways, this is the same. This is another downturn in a cyclical business, and in some ways, it's quite different. And so we're all trying to figure out what the impact of this. And one thing we would be eager to find out in the chat rooms and in the breakout is other people's experience, whether they're seeing the same things we're seeing. Gary?
Yeah, and like Matt, I've been doing this for quite a while, since the early 90s, been doing various workouts, both in the wine industry and other industries, and on both sides of the table. But as we'll be talking about, today's crisis seems a little bit different than some of the past downturns and requires some different techniques to try to get through it.
Next slide. Gary, you want to do the introduction?
Yeah, so, just sort of big picture, obviously the COVID-19 pandemic is really impacting different wine businesses in very different ways. But one of the most common things that seems to be happening is that borrowers are just not able to service their loan debts because they're still trying to do that while meeting payroll and other obligations in a situation where revenues are plummeting. And the result of that, of course, is that requires some very difficult conversations that borrowers in the industry need to have with their lenders to try to make it through this crisis.
Next slide. And one thing I want to point out is that much of this discussion will be kind of focused on from the borrower's viewpoint, in the sense that our firm works for both borrowers and lenders in the industry. Most of my experience and most of my work tends to be on the borrower side, but we're going to try to get, because this is a two-way conversation typically, we're going to try to discuss both perspectives and the concerns and the needs of both parties. Let's start by sort of grounding this and looking at some of the factors that make the wine industry, I think, particularly susceptible to disruption in the current environment. Even in so-called normal times, the wine industry is, it's pretty challenging. It's agricultural, so it's subject to farm cycles. It's a luxury product. So in both cases, you've got kind of a cyclical industry. Because it is a luxury product, largely luxury product, it's heavily dependent on affinity marketing in many segments. So for the many labels trying to establish themselves, they are trying to make wine less of a commodity and try to create a connection with the consumer. In addition, because of the 3-tiered system, wine is heavily dependent on a limited distribution chain. As you know, the number of distributors shrinks year by year. Certain groups of distributors tend to dominate, and as anyone who's tried to get attention and shelf space knows, getting your brand out there is not easy. Gary?
Yeah, and some other characteristics of the industry is that the assets themselves required to run the business tend to be very expensive. You've got obviously expensive equipment to distill the wine and to store it and to distribute it. And the result of that, in combination with the fact that the business is cyclical, almost all wine businesses require a lot of debt financing to get through the year. Next slide, please.
So we see that there are challenges even in normal times, but was 2020 ever going to be normal? And this is sort of a yes/no answer. Yes, in the sense that we are dealing with a cyclical oversupply of grapes and juice, and that is certainly not unusual. It's challenging, but not unusual. I would say no, in the sense that one, we've had environmental risks in the last few years, usually fire, smoke, that we hadn't really seen before with the frequency that is come up. And secondly, there's a generational change. Both many founders of brands, family brands particularly, have been looking to cycle out, and therefore perhaps have not been creating the excitement for their brands that they started with, or that new brands have. And is the SVB, is Robert McMillan's SVB Wine Market report has indicated, the millennial generation has not taken to wine in quite the same way and with the same enthusiasm the previous generations have. So there seems to be a softening of the market in any event, even before this. Next slide.
Yeah, and then adding on to all those factors, the COVID-19 crisis has introduced a number of other factors that have made things even more challenging for the business. Obviously, the biggest one being the shelter-in-place orders that have been imposed nationwide since mid-March, and all the Bay Area counties as well since then. They're even more stringent than the statewide criteria. The combination of that and the social distancing, which has prevented people from visiting wineries and even being around each other in this sort of environment. Not to mention the fact that the economy itself is obviously struggling. I think the unemployment numbers are over 40 million and counting. And even though the entire economy has been hurt, probably the hardest hit parts have been in the leisure industry and tourism and restaurants, and obviously that includes the wine industry. So the only sort of bright spot so far has been there's been some uptick in off-premises sales, at least for some brands, as the crisis has unfolded. And I think from personal experience, some of us have all been drinking a little more to try to get through this crisis. Next slide, please.
Yeah, the survey of the Kaplan and Lewis households suggests that there's been significant hoarding going on here. So, what does this mean then for the industry, and what are we seeing at least? Obviously drastic reductions in immediate on-premise sales. Tasting rooms aren't open. Restaurants haven't been open. We have an uncertain future for restoring those on-premise sales. We don't know yet kind of what kind of volume can be serviced safely in a world which will continue some social distancing. We don't know what people's enthusiasm will be for coming to the wine country and visiting spots. And that leads to a loss of the affinity building connections. So to the extent that your winery relied on wine tastings, on-premises visits in order to establish the connection with the consumer, that's going to be that much harder. We know at least early on in this crisis, distribution channels were clogged up. Distributors were reluctant to order and were to some extent using payment cycles as working capital. So that may have relieved itself a little bit, but at least we can expect some continued uncertainty in that area. Now, as I said, we've gone through downturns before, and so there are some hints, I suspect, as to what we can expect in this one. Most recently, what we've tended to see has been really high-end labels, cult labels, weathering fairly well, and somewhat larger volume, known names, safe brands being looked at as value brands and doing okay. And then in between the aspirational brands, labels are typically trying to move up the chain. Those have suffered. We used to call them expense account brands, the ones you would order in a restaurant when you were taking out your clients, when we had restaurants, of course. Those ones have tended to fall off, and I suspect that will happen again here. I would certainly be interested in hearing how whether that experience is in fact being realized by some of the participants here. So one of the challenges obviously is going to be in a market which was shrinking, appeared to be shrinking to begin with, and now has more limited outlets. How do you carve out a niche, even without considering your debt issues? How do you create revenue under those circumstances? Next slide, please.
So the bottom line from all this is essentially there's a lousy bottom line for a lot of the participants in the wine industry. There's clearly been a drop in cash flow. And so the biggest problem, number one, is then as wineries have less cash, they're less able to pay off their debts to their lenders. But there's an added problem. Even if the wineries can scrape together enough money to make the debt service payments, most loan documents now have various financial covenants included in them, which require a certain level of sales and operating earnings. And if the winery gets below that, that's a default under the loan documents, even if the loan's being timely paid. So those two prospects, the inability to make the monthly or quarterly payment on the debt service and the potential inability to meet all the financial covenants, are creating a lot of defaults under loans in the wine industry.
I want to talk about that for a second too, because if you deal with loan documents, that they've got a multitude of covenants covering all sorts of different situations. But these are the ones that really tend to be impacted by situations like this, by situations of financial distress. That is the obvious one about payment, and then the early tripwires that financial covenants represent.
Right, and then to make things even more challenging, not only are the wineries having trouble servicing their debt or running into potential defaults, but a lot of them actually need additional financing just to weather the storm and bridge the gap between the declining revenue and expenses that are not really moving down that much. So, in fact, not only must you worry about the lender coming after you for potential defaults, you've got to come in hat in hand to try to get more money sometimes just to keep operating your business. Next slide, please.
Next slide, please. So, we've talked about the challenges from the operating side, the winery, the vineyard, the associated businesses. Let's not forget, again, there are two parties here. Lenders have their own challenges. Like most lenders in most industries, wine business lenders typically rely on steady asset values, that is the collateral, and predictable cash flows. And as you can see, neither of those predicates are present today. Facing this, on the one hand, if you've read loan documents, they're one-sided. All right, they give the lender a lot of legal leverage. The lender's the one lending the money. But the COVID world puts some real practical limits on that leverage. First of all, both borrowers and potential buyers of winery and vineyard assets are under financial stress. So, both your borrower is in trouble if you're a lender, and who are you going to sell the collateral to if you foreclose? The list of potential buyers is much shorter than it may have been, say, a year ago. Legal relief has been delayed by emergency moratoria, that is, court closures and debtor relief actions taken to, say, prevent foreclosures. Even as courts reopen, we can expect that they will be overwhelmed. They're going to have a lot on their plate So legal relief is the legal relief that is anticipated in the loan documents will be much harder to obtain through the courts. The result of this is that it is unproductive for lenders in many cases to reflexively declare defaults and exercise the remedies that their documents purport to give them. Lenders all vary, right? Different lenders have different positions and different perceptions in the industry. A community bank that is heavily invested in the wine industry, a local bank, is likely to take a different approach to working with its borrowers than a hedge fund that has come in lately and is opportunistically invested in this area. And again, people's reputations matter more in the local environment than they do, say, a anonymous hedge fund out of, say, New York. So that's going to impact how a lender sees the world and how they're going to at least initially approach this problem. And then let's face it, this is, much as the business itself is cyclical, lender interest and commitment to the area has been cyclical. Again, some lenders are all in just because of their position in the market and their geographic position. Others may, others, as a matter of fashion, may have dipped their toes in and decided they don't like it particularly. Or some lenders may just decide they're overexposed in the current era, no matter what their enthusiasm. Again, that is going to have an impact on how they look at each particular case and what kind of risks they want to take. Next slide, please.
So all this put together essentially creates an environment that's ripe for negotiation. The fact is that both borrowers in the wine industry and their lenders are subject to the downturn and all the uncertainty that's resulting from the pandemic. And the net result of all this uncertainty is having negotiations to try to reduce uncertainty and get a little bit more clarity on the relationship between borrowers and lenders and what's going to happen in terms of all the loans that are outstanding.
Yeah, negotiation is really the only way that the parties can truly control their fates. Next slide, please. So again, what are those negotiations going to look like? I think it's important to look at, again, the lender's point of view. And for you lenders in the audience here, please feel free to add or correct anything. But here's what I've seen in the 35 years I've been doing this, or 36 years I've been doing this. And there are things, these are points of view I think it's worth, as a borrower operator, reminding yourself of, because they're different from a typical entrepreneur's or owner's point of view. First of all, ultimately the lender's goal is repayment. It's repayment, repayment, repayment. No matter how much a lender may be and its line officers may be committed to you, to the industry, when put to a choice between taking some outside risk in order to assure your success and getting repaid, a lender pretty much has to lean on the side of repayment. It's got a fiduciary duty to, it's got both legal and fiduciary duties to get repaid. It doesn't get any of the upside. Secondly, and I think this is important, particularly for someone who's got an entrepreneurial frame of mind, to understand loan officers have bosses, okay? They are not, it's not their money. They're not taking risk with their own money. They have people that decide their fates. They don't want to be embarrassed, obviously, for making decisions that might turn out to be poor decisions. And they've got people above them, who are looking at a different world, kind of a more holistic world, and may have a different attitude towards what the institution's capacity for risk and for taking unusual decisions might be. Added to that, lenders are heavily regulated. There are things they simply can't do, regardless of how much it may make sense at a particular circumstance. A lender's point of view typically is they don't get paid to take unusual risks. Their view is that the risks they're taking are kind of interest rate risk, some limited collateral risk or the like. Now, again, this is not an unusual situation. So reality may intervene here. And that is that in order to get to the ultimate goal of repayment, a lender may have to take risks that it otherwise would not have to in order to make it through. For example, the conventional wisdom is that lenders don't lend into default. Why would you throw good money after bad? Again, in the post-COVID-19 environment where collateral may not be particularly liquid, lenders may have to lend into defaults in order to bridge their borrowers and get to the other side to a point where the borrower is stable enough that, in fact, it can repay the loan. That may be the lesser of the evils. Finally, lenders don't want to run the business. Okay, the loan documents may allow foreclosure. It's not the optimum solution in most cases. If there's competent management in place, that's going to be preferred in most situations to a lender taking over, unless there's some buyer in the wings that's chomping at the bit and can solve the problem. Next slide, please. Margaret, next slide.
So in terms of what to expect when these negotiations start, one of the things to keep in mind is it's really a negotiation between parties that are both in a bad situation that no one really expected. And typically, and especially in these circumstances, there's a lot of emotion on the line in these negotiations. You've got people's livelihoods, obviously, are at risk. Reputations in the industry are also up in the air. And, from the financial institution side, a lot of the bonuses are dependent on how well their accounts perform, their clients' accounts perform. So all those things go into sort of a pressure cooker atmosphere. And it's just important to remember that these negotiations can be very pressure-filled, even more than your typical lender-borrower negotiation. But another thing to keep in mind is really a workout is the art of the possible, sort of making the best of a lousy situation. It's rare that parties will walk away from the table and feel like they won. I mean, I think usually a definition of a good negotiation is both sides feel like it wasn't that great, but at least they got through it. And I think that's particularly true in this situation. The other thing that the borrowers in the wine industry need to be prepared for is there's going to be a very slow process in terms of trying to get responses from the decision makers on the lender side. Outside of the fact that it's usually a bureaucracy in the first place, there's just so much negotiation going on now that lenders are really overwhelmed, and it can be hard to get to a decision maker and get them to focus on your particular situation. And another challenging aspect of the negotiations in this dynamic are that there's essentially a changing cast of characters. On the lender side, the loan officers that usually are the point people get replaced by a special asset group that usually comes in when a loan is in distress. And now the wine business is dealing with a new set of people at the bank that they may have never met before. Likewise, on the borrower side, borrowers in this situation may engage turnaround specialists or workout consultants to be their point people rather than the regular management team. And in fact, a lot of lenders will welcome that. They'll like to have a fresh pair of eyes here that's not biased about the situation, is realistic about what needs to get done. But in any event, both sides need to be ready for the fact that it's going to be dealing with some new people that you've never dealt with before in a negotiation.
And I want to add a couple of points to that. And Gary's point about this is a bad situation that neither party expected, and the people's people have a lot on the line. I mean, think about a family winery where the family's name is on the door. I mean, that's a lot. The family's assets are tied up, their reputation's tied up. One thing that there's a temptation in those situations to do pointing fingers and say, this is somebody's fault, this is your fault, this is my, et cetera. It's not particularly helpful. It's seldom helpful, frankly, in negotiations, but in this case in particular, it's a distraction that makes it much harder to reach a situation where both sides are realistically looking at what their options are and trying to make tough decisions. I would also point out that we're talking about different teams participating in this process. It is true, as Gary said, that typically when a loan gets into a bad place, a special asset team takes over, a workout team. There are different names for it, because there are going to be so many issues out there, both in one industry and in other industries. That may be a slower process than it typically is, but it is likely to happen. So borrowers need to be prepared for the fact that the people they're talking to could change at any time, and therefore they've got to be flexible about their approaches and understanding what the new faces are looking for and what their imperatives are. Next slide, please.
So there's some golden rules that come out of these negotiations from the borrower side, at least. And the first one is the borrower be trustworthy rule. And this really means if the lender does not find the borrower to be trustworthy and cannot really believe them, then there's no incentive for the lender to really work with the borrower. So it's really important to be candid and be forthright with your contacts at the lender, and not try to hide things and shade the truth and that sort of thing, because you're going to lose credibility and the lender's just not going to help you and you're going to be stuck. Another big golden rule is borrower be the solution. And that really means things like instead of having the lender view you as the problem, it really makes sense to have the lender think that you understand your business very well and that you understand your situation well and you're being realistic about the challenges you face, and that you've got a well thought out plan to come out on the other side. It's not just you need help, but you don't know what's going to happen next. So I think all those things are important to keep in mind as a borrower when you go into the negotiation.
Yeah, remember, most lenders are not looking to take over the business. And so you're trying to give them reasons not to take over the business. You're trying to show them that you're the person who can get them to the other side. They don't need to put somebody else in there. You don't want to be part of the problem. So in preparing for the kind of conversations that are kind of coming up, I think there are a number of things that borrowers in particular can do to help themselves and put themselves in the best position. One of the biggest is don't be in denial. We've seen over and over again the delay in recognizing the seriousness of one situation limits options and makes it much harder to reach a good result. Now, the current situation where everybody's sort of in the same boat may make it a lot easier for people to recognize, hey, this is lousy. We've got to do something about it. You're not going to feel like you are exposed and the only one that's got this problem. Everybody's in the same place. So take advantage of that. Be realistic about what you're facing. That leads to realistically assess your operations, finances, and plans. How are you operating? Where's your revenue coming in? What kind of revenue can you expect? How do you adjust to the new reality? Think that through. That means managing your costs, obviously. I think most people I know are doing that and doing a good job of it. Implementing a realistic staffing plan. I apologize. My local audience did not appreciate what I just said.
Lenders at the door.
Yeah, I think it is the mailman, actually. So if you don't need a tasting room that's staffed quite the same way it was before, or hospitality staff, are there other places they can go and be useful? Or do you need to downsize? I mean, it's really hard, but you really need to take a hard look at this. Take advantage of government programs. Now we're kind of at the end of at least the initial stage of this, but I think there's still some PPP money out there. If you qualify, you should be looking at it. Anything to kind of create runway for yourself to try to find a solution. How can you create revenue? Can you reposition your brand to be more of a value brand, or could you create if you don't want to that has downsides, obviously, because then it's much harder to go back up the scale again. So instead, could you create a second label? We've seen people going into the canned wine business and do other things like that in order to create some cash flow. It might not be how they see their image as a business, but it will create the cash flow that supports that image. Associated with that, rethink the visitor experience. In a world of social distancing, how are you going to cycle enough people through your facilities in order to create that connection, that consumer connection that seems to be also important? How do you do it safely? Think of ways you can add value that way. We talked about a second label. We've got an oversupplied grape market. Are there ways you can exploit that in order to get inexpensive supply that may help you on the cost side? And finally, this is something I feel kind of strongly about is, in so many cycles, what I see are people who are facing a lot of financial stress, placing all their bets on an investor or some outsider coming in with money to help bail them out. In the time I've been practicing, it's been the Japanese, the Saudis, the Europeans, the Chinese. The phrase I sometimes use is Martians with money, that there's somebody out there who's got a pot of cash who will invest in this, and then everything will be fine. And that may happen. But basing one's plan around that, I've just seen so many people be disappointed over the years. This is sort of a variant of the don't be in denial rule. Investors don't invest into trouble unless they're looking for some steep discounts. And so, typically negotiations drag on. The situation gets worse. And either the deal doesn't make, or it makes it a very disappointing price, at which point the business really doesn't have a choice. So be really careful about placing all your bets on new money coming in to bail you out. Next slide, please.
So there are some things that a borrower can do to try to prepare for these difficult conversations with their lender. And probably the most important thing it can do is to communicate early and often with lenders. It's much better that a borrower is proactive in coming to the lender and discussing challenges and problems and how to try to solve them, instead of hiding them and having the lender find out and be unhappy that they were left in the dark. And this really builds into the whole trust concept. In other words, the lender's not going to trust you if they feel like you're not being candid with them and they feel that you're really hiding things from them. Now, of course, different lenders require different approaches, and the borrower's got to be cognizant of who it's dealing with, and what techniques might be the most effective, depending on who the lender folks are and who their personnel are that you're dealing with. But the real goal is to try to convince the lender that the borrower is most likely to succeed and then be in a position to repay the debt if it's given some breathing space, rather than the lender essentially shutting it down and trying to take over the business or foreclose on the business and sell it off. And that can require a lot of things, not just the trustworthiness, but also trying to persuade the lender that you've got a good understanding of how the business is operating, where the weaknesses are, where things need to be improved, and that you've got an action plan to really deal with this.
And I think we want to be clear here that what we're talking about is not that either party just rolls over. Different, again, depending on the situation. If a party's being unreasonable on the other side, you may have to take a different approach. You may have to be tougher or even more obstreperous in order to get attention or get people focused on, more realistically focused on appropriate issues. But what we're trying to model here is a good cooperative response, which on the whole tends to be the cheapest and the most effective in our experience. So any discussion in any industry about troubled debt facilities tends to have the same issues come up. And these are all, again, they're part and parcel of the golden rule about being part of the solution. These are different ways of exploring that. First of all, it's going to be, what's the borrower's performance history? Above all, do its operational and financial troubles predate the current situation? So if a borrower was in decline before COVID, just dealing with COVID and the fallout from that is not going to solve the problem. There are deeper problems, and that requires a deeper dive by both the borrower and the lender to find a solution. Gary?
Yeah, and some other issues that the lender almost certainly will want answers to quickly is, how strong is the current management team, and would it make sense to try to get some outside help here, either a turnaround consultant or a workout consultant, or replacing key officers like a CFO or a COO to help strengthen the business. And along those lines, the lender is going to certainly look at whether the borrower consistently delivers on their commitments. If it does what it says it's going to do in terms of providing financial statements timely and making changes it promised to make, and keeping the lender in the loop on communications, those sort of things are going to be key to whether the lender takes the borrower seriously in the negotiation. And as part of that, it's not just providing financial data, it's got to be reliable data. If the borrower's financial systems are not reliable and the data keeps changing and the lender gets a report one month and then gets corrections the next month, the lender's not going to really have faith that any of the information, the financial information, at least coming from the borrower, is reliable.
Remember, we talked about that loan officers have bosses, all right? Can you imagine going to someone you report to and telling them that, the good news I gave you last month, never mind. It's just not a great position. This is part of being trustworthy. This is part of being part of the solution. A very important part, as we keep emphasizing over and over again, is, does the borrower seem realistic about its situation? Does it have realistic plans, or does it seem to be in denial? Again, the lender has already concluded that there's a problem here. Typically, it's going to want to see that the borrower understands that there's a problem, A, that there's a problem, and B, has thought through the problem and has come up with a plan that people can believe in to get through it. Kind of some subsidiary issues. In this business in particular, it's important how the borrower ordinarily distributes its products and how open those channels might be currently. A borrower that typically distributes its products through on-premises sales is going to be looked at very differently from a borrower who is basically relying on their direct-to-consumer platform. So if you're in the former position, you want to have an answer to, well, how do I get through? How do I get product out there now? Finally, how exposed is the lender? The old saying is, you borrow a little bit, the bank owns you. You borrow a lot, you own the bank. There's some truth to that. Lenders who are extremely exposed to a borrower, where they stand to lose a lot of money, are in a position where they may have to treat the borrower more as a business partner and take a few more risks than they might otherwise have to take in order to get through on the other side. They have inadvertently picked up a little bit of equity risk that they didn't expect. Next slide, please.
So there's a few parting warnings that we can try to give to you in terms of approaching these negotiations. Probably the biggest one on the borrower side is that even a successful workout is not going to be without cost. I mean, lenders are looking for several different items of fee recovery if they're going to do a workout. For one thing, they want all their out-of-pocket costs covered. If they have to hire other folks to look at the credit, whether that's getting more appraisals done or inventory analysis, or hiring accounting folks to crunch more numbers, that's going to be a cost that they're going to pass on. And almost always lenders will charge an additional fee for doing the workout transaction. And not only that, but oftentimes lenders will want kick up in the interest rate to compensate them for the additional risk that they're taking on by lending further into a troubled credit or just continuing with a more challenging debt than they originally had loaned into. So all those things can run up and be pretty expensive for the borrower. And obviously, cash is going to be tight in this situation. And, sometimes at least a borrower can negotiate to have some of these costs paid over time, although at least some of them will have to be paid up front. I mean, usually at least the out-of-pocket stuff, the lenders are going to want immediate money for that because they're writing checks right away for that. Some of the other items, like the additional fees that are being charged to do the loan documents, sometimes the lenders will take a little bit of a deferral on recovering that. But something the borrower needs to keep in mind is that there's undoubtedly going to be costs in going through this process.
One way to look at this is from the borrower's point of view, this is an investment. All right, there is significant costs, its own costs plus the lender's costs that it will ultimately have to compensate the lender for. And so therefore, before the borrower gets, is an operating company, before you get far down the road in incurring these costs, you ought to make sure that the investment's going to pan out, that it's got a good chance of succeeding. And that means, again, not just kind of going with the flow here, but integrating this in part of a well thought out plan. When you want to get hot and heavy into these negotiations, you ought to have an end goal in mind and a structure in mind so that you've got the greatest chance of recouping some of these costs you're now going to be investing on top of everything you've invested in the business so far. Next slide, please. And again, the other warning that we want to give you is time is not your friend. If you're a troubled wine business, it may be that things will get a little better as business opens up again. I think Lord knows, we certainly hope so. But some of the damage, a lot of the damage has already been done. And so particularly if you were dealing with some structural issues beforehand that were exacerbated by the COVID situation, you want to try to get on top of those sooner rather than later before things deteriorate further. Next slide.
So one other thing to consider when going through the workout negotiations is they may not work. They may not be successful, and a borrower's got to consider some other options that they need to use if it can't restructure the debt, and it looks like the lender is pursuing or potentially going to pursue legal remedies. And there's several different options, and it's probably beyond the scope of this program to go through all of them, but just in terms of general principles, the three that come to mind, or the four that come to mind, are potential bankruptcy filing, the potential appointment of a receiver, which is a court officer that essentially oversees the company's restructuring and often liquidation, what's called an assignment for the benefit of creditors, and which is similar to a bankruptcy proceeding, which essentially has an independent party that comes in, takes over the assets, and tries to sell them off, ideally as a going concern. And finally, there's just a corporate dissolution, which really is just closing the doors and winding up and shutting the business down without going through a more formal process like a bankruptcy or receiver, or it's known as an ABC, which is the acronym for the Assignment for Benefit of Creditors. Now, unfortunately, at least in the wine business, bankruptcy is often a very unattractive alternative. In addition to the normal downsides of filing bankruptcy, which are substantial cost and often delay in getting through a process, in the wine industry world, it typically tarnishes the reputation of the business in a way that it never recovers. So it's rare that you'll see a bankruptcy in the valley of a wine business that gets through on the other side. So that's usually the sort of the last straw, and if all the other alternatives have been considered and exhausted. But by the same token, just the threat of bankruptcy can bring the lender to the negotiating table or back to the table if discussions have broken down, especially if the borrower appears to be serious about potentially filing. If they've hired bankruptcy counsel, lenders will take that very seriously. They don't want to be subject to the uncertainties and costs of going through a bankruptcy. And a lot of times they will get a lot more realistic in negotiations if they think there's a real credible threat of bankruptcy.
And I think it's important to emphasize credible. I've been on both sides of this. I've been in any number of negotiations on, say, the borrower side where somebody says, well, we'll just tell them we'll file for bankruptcy. And in fact, any reasonably sophisticated lender knows that bankruptcy is not a panacea. It is expensive, as Gary said. It can be damaging to reputation. It results in a loss of control. Bankruptcy does not create revenue if that's your primary issue. And so most reasonably sophisticated lenders are going to discount that unless they see that it's a situation, in fact, where bankruptcy might, in fact, be realistic and useful for the borrower. And one way, as Gary indicated, to flag that is to bring some bankruptcy experts onto your team to show that you've actually thought it through and that you are investing in that possibility, if in fact it's a realistic possibility. It is not a throwaway, I guess, is the bottom line on this.
Right. And, just to jump back to the receiver concept, a lot of times the lender, as an interim measure, will say, okay, I'm not going to let the borrower stay in business. I don't think the management team has got what it takes. But by the same token, I don't want to take these assets over myself and try to run the business. So a typical alternative is to have what's known as a receiver appointed by the court to take over the business and essentially run the business. And even though the court ultimately decides who should be the receiver, they take the suggestion of the lenders very seriously in that situation. And most loan documents will require that a receiver be appointed if the lender wants one, if there's been a default. And a lot of times lenders will pick somebody that's seasoned in the industry to take over as a receiver. And even though technically speaking, those receivers are officers of the court, they're supposed to be independent. As a practical matter, the lender is giving them a lot of direction and guidance as to how they want the business run and potential sales and that sort of thing. So that is one option from the lender side to consider as sort of an interim step between essentially doing nothing versus trying to take over the business through a foreclosure and resell it on your own.
And again, look to our golden rules for ways to dissuade the lender from taking this step, because it's an awfully disruptive step.
Yeah.
Next slide. So, I'm hoping that, look, this was inevitably a somewhat generic discussion. We can't go into individual situations here. So we have created a chat, the chat function for people to present questions, and we can answer those for a short time. And then, Margaret, we've also created breakout rooms, correct?
That's correct, Matt. This is Clara Ota, also with Farella and Martel. Margaret will be assigning chat rooms, breakout rooms. So if you want to stay on the line, just hold on and she'll be assigning those shortly.
So, and again, we are trying to find our way through this new world the same as everybody else. We're all kind of the blind men reaching up and trying to touch and describe different parts of the elephant, although why I am always under the tail is a different issue. But so if people have different perspectives, we'd be delighted to hear them. It'd be a great conversation. This is going to be a really challenging time for a lot of people. And the more knowledge we have going into it, the better that most people will get out in the best possible way at the other end. So thank you very much for listening, and we look forward to your questions and comments.
Thank you all.